Good afternoon, everybody. I am so happy to be here with this wonderful panel that I have here with me today. And we are excited to share some thoughts and ideas with you and to grapple with some of the questions that we've been struggling with for this last year and how we can go further with our children's ministries. So we're talking about bouncing back and gaining momentum. I kind of think like a bouncy ball, something like that today. And I want to welcome each one of you here with us today. And I have some questions for you to write in the chat. Please write your name, where you are from, and how many years you've been serving in children's ministries in the chat. And that gives us an idea of exactly where you're at. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here as the Children's Ministries Director of the Oregon Conference and to ask my friends and colleagues here to introduce themselves this afternoon.
My name is Jana Lee. I am one of the pastors. I oversee family ministries at Meadow, Glade Adventist Church in Battleground, Washington.
My name is Ryan Whitehead. I pastor at the Adventist Community Church in Vancouver, and I get to hang out with children and their families. It's a lot of fun.
My name is Macy Weir, and I am the associate pastor at the Tualatin and Tabernacle Church District.
Hi, my name is Jennifer O, and I am the Children's Ministry Director at Rock Fellowship SDA Church.
My name is Sara Withers, and I'm one of the associate pastors at the Beaverton Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I work specifically with family and children ministries.
So bouncing back again to that concept of the bouncing ball, every one that you see children playing with are different shapes and sizes. And because of that, I just want to, right at the beginning of our discussion today, say each of us comes from a church that is a different shape and size. In other words, whatever we say today may be unique to our church, and you have your own ethos in your own church, but we want you to glean as many thoughts as you can this afternoon and to make what works for you something that you can incorporate, but remembering that there's not just one model of doing things. So to me, that's really important. And we're going to have two parts in our seminar this afternoon. And the first part, I'm going to direct questions about how you're coming back into children's ministries. What are some of the things that you have learnt during COVID with regards to the church? And I'm going to ask Jana straight off the bat.
So many things have been learned. One of them I will say is I learned I can learn new things. I was never somebody who was into technology, and I went from always getting somebody else to run tech for me to creating my own videos. And while I am by no means a graphic artist or a video, designer of any sort, I learned that I can learn things. I can go on YouTube, and I am capable of learning new things. And that's actually opened me up to a lot of other ideas. Like, oh, if I can learn this, maybe it's not too late to learn other things. I just didn't know that I could still do such massive new things like that.
Sara,
Yes.
I think you have something to share with us about that whole idea.
Yeah, one of the things I learned a lot through COVID about just our church members and our volunteers is that we are adaptable and resilient. Things that we didn't think that we would really venture into, such as Zoom meetings and children participating in videos each week. were embraced fully when we had to. And I think that was a good reminder for me as a leader that sometimes when we have the environment that we just have to work with this, church members, volunteers, leaders will adapt and will make it work when that's the options that we have to work with.
Some things have been quite surprising. And Jennifer, I know that there was something that you found quite surprising during COVID as far as volunteers is concerned.
Yes, so I mean, I'm sure we can all agree it's not easy trying to find volunteers. But during the COVID, about a year and a half, I would say our church, we were able to just organically and naturally just find a lot of leaders, or I wouldn't even just say leaders, maybe even a lot of volunteers who were willing to help out, because I guess because it took them away from the in-person was taken away. So when we were doing everything pre-recorded and even pre-recording children's praise songs, a lot of the kids volunteered a little bit more. Parents were more willing to volunteer, where it didn't take a lot, where they could just take a small part and we can all put it together and we can make it into one big thing, versus one person leading out like in a major part where they would it might be a little nerve-wracking and kind of like a bigger role they might have felt intimidated for. But some little pieces, like where they can implement like little parts of the videos, whatever it may be, they were more willing to. So I would say it was actually a really great opportunity where our church was able to work more together.
And I think there's some spin-off now for you with that, isn't there? As far as every church that I've spoken to is struggling to get leaders back on board. So it actually puts you on a forward footing.
Yes. And actually, because there were some surprises and volunteers, it made me think, the people that you think that could help you, that you might have you might already have implemented, like where you're like, maybe I'll ask this person. You just never know. I think just asking all around, all the people that you might not expect that would help you can help you. So I think it's taking what you think a little bit away and just kind of taking the leap and asking those who you think might say no to.
So that bouncy ball really went outside of the box, right?
So a lot of our volunteers at church, I'm asking a lot of people, like our VBS hasn't come up yet, and it's coming up in a couple of weeks, and I am using everyone.
Okay. So as you go down the passageway, people disappear? I've heard that said before. Well, families and churches partnered to do lessons at home in many churches. And I'm just wondering what kind of experience you had with that, Ryan.
Yeah, sure. I've watched some of the content from my colleagues here that they did at different points along through the journey in this last year and a half or so. And probably all of us tuned into some content that was produced maybe south of us in California, or maybe at larger churches that just have, a huge staff and a production team, kind of like here at the Oregon Conference. But I know at our church, it was definitely a switch, but I think in some ways a very positive one, where we threw it back at the parents and the families and said, hey, this is an opportunity for you as parents to take an active role in the discipling of your kids. And whether we did that effectively or not through the last year and a half, I think through the challenges, it helped us recognize that we need to make that a priority. And even in the last few weeks, I've had conversations with parents who said, hey, like, how can we keep this aspect of discipleship, of being engaged with our kids, actively a part of what we do as a church? And so, it was great to be able to provide, just a link from the Oregon Conference for all the resources that they give. So thank you, Shirley, for all your hard work with your team that we all valued and appreciated. But also, as we move back to not what we've been living the last year and a half, But as we evaluate, say, hey, how can we connect personally, but how can we also encourage and move our families forward in active discipling their kids? Because if they're younger in children's ministries, if they're younger than elementary or high school age, those kids are with their parents all the time. And we want to encourage that and support through that. And I can't say I have all the answers for that, but that's definitely one of the targets that I want to shoot for, getting parents engaged with helping their kids take those steps, because hopefully throughout their whole journey, those parents will be engaged in that journey.
Yes, I'm hoping that through this whole thing, that the engagement of parents, where parents are always the first ones to disciple their children, has become stronger. I know, though, that parents have really struggled through COVID, and that was kind of a balance for some of them to still try and keep working and doing that. But we certainly all, I think, encouraged that as much as we could. So talking about that bouncy ball going outside the box again, Pastor Macy, how did that bouncy ball go outside of the box for you?
Well, I think this is one of those hidden gems in the last year and a half, is that we've done more than we thought we could. We were all put in this position, and we all had to go, gulp, okay, how are we going to do this? And that has really meant that the sky is the limit, right? Because now that we're coming back, we're saying, oh, but we don't have to do it the way we were doing it. We can try something new. We can do whatever we dream up. And people are so much more open to that than they might have been a year and a half ago. Volunteers, families, even the kids themselves. And so, we have had to think outside of the box with how are we going to do Sabbath school on Zoom, or children's praise on YouTube, or all of these wonderful things. How are we going to send things home with families? How are we going to facilitate that? But we can keep that going. So we don't have to climb back in the box now. We can continue to think outside of the box, and anything that we come up with, let's see how to make that happen. So I really think that that's one of the biggest blessings to us through this experience.
Pastor Ryan is reminding me that you became quite the storyteller.
Yep, yeah. So what Shirley is referencing is, if you go to our Tabernacle SDA Church YouTube page, there's a playlist there of over 100 stories with Pastor Macy. And what that grew out of was actually something we had been working on before COVID hit. So we've noticed that a number of kids don't have the biblical literacy that my generation did. That we were all in grade school, we were all in Sabbath school every week, and we were just kind of immersed in Bible stories. And that there's so many other forms of media now than there were when I was growing up. And so we said, how can we make this easy on parents? How can we provide some easy biblical literacy that parents don't have to slave over? And I said, hey, I have lots of kids' books on my shelf. I could do a couple of those a week, couple a month, something. And then parents could pop that on for 15 minutes, know that it's safe content while their kid is getting ready for bed or during bath time or whatever. And that's easy for parents. And so we were already headed down the road to make that happen. And then COVID hit and we said, cool, we're doing them every day. And you will see if you start watching that playlist that I got better. The first few were filmed on my phone this way, and there was no microphone, and the sound is awful, and the lighting is terrible, and my closet is open behind me. And there were a lot of mistakes along the ways. It's gotten better. But, there's a bunch of stories there, and we've had good engagement with that. Surprisingly, it is the older ladies at church who appreciate them most. but hey, outside the box.
I do love that. So, a question to all of you here. As you have reopened, what are you still doing to keep kids and volunteers safe? So, I'm going to come right back to you again and ask you that question. Are there still some things that you are using as guidelines for that?
So we are trying to do as much as we can without adding too much burden to our volunteers and families. So it's kind of that balancing act between, what should we do? How do we help people feel safe and be safe? But also, we don't want it to be so much that people say, oh man, I'm just going to watch online. We would like them to come back to Sabbath school and things. So we are keeping some of our cleaning. We're doing some more sanitizing and things. And we have adapted some of our Sabbath school programs, especially our cradle roll and kindergarten programs. Those kids tend to be the least good at social distancing. And their Sabbath schools tend to use the most props as well. So they are picking up and touching. So we have some extra cleaning that is happening in there, but we also have gone to, each kid has a basket with their name on it, with their props in it, that go back in their basket, get sanitized, and then those are their same props the following week. So we're trying to not share those things as much as is possible.
That sounds good. Have you got anything to add to that, Pastor Jana?
So we are absolutely trying to keep the kids and families safe, and we know that there's a lot of different regulations and advice out there, and it's very hard to navigate. So what we have done is, we as a team, either our children's ministries team and our pastoral team on top of that, and our elders, we've kind of come up with some things we're going to be doing. And then I find that what most people want, regardless of how they feel about safety or not safety, is to know what to expect. So we've tried to establish this is what we're doing and then communicate what we're doing so that those who want a little extra safety, I'm not misleading them, and then they come to church and they're feeling like we're not doing enough. Or those who are just kind of done with everything and want to show up, to ask them to mask and they weren't expecting to actually is really hard on a kid. And so we've tried to be very clear, and we are asking children to mask, during this advisory time because they can't be vaccinated yet. And we've tried to be very clear with people. We will be asking this so that they know what to expect. And I think that's a big part of it, to not make people feel uncomfortable either way when they come to church. We want them to come and engage and enjoy church and not have to think about it.
Can I say something to that as well?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
I just, I like to talk. No. One thing I think that's important in this space that we're talking about making people transition well and feel comfortable, is just really letting people know that where they're at is okay and not forcing them to be where I'm at. Because I'm in a larger church community, and so there's some people that came during COVID but aren't coming now, and then vice versa. And so anyway, just to be a little better listener and to encourage people to take things at the speed in which they're comfortable, while encouraging, like Macy said, about, hey, we want to see you, and we love you and want more of you. So
I think one of the hard things is to make sure that your church is a no judgment zone, so that we can accompany people where they are and help them move forward with that. Pastor Sara, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we are doing many of the things that Macy described, and Jana: communication, individual boxes, keeping things clean. I guess the one thing that I would add that hasn't already been mentioned yet is just gradually taking people out of the very strict guideline requirements to maybe a more in-person experience, and working with people where they're at. We've been providing both a virtual option and an in-person option, and as we get to a point where we're maybe less required to stay home and keep people social distance, we're trying to make it a slow transition so that as people feel more comfortable, they can attend and they can see it first in a safe way before they decide to fully engage with whatever we're doing, trying to communicate through we have a church app that has been an amazing blessing. We had just about to pull the plug on creating our church app right before COVID hit. And it was just within a month or so after COVID started that we were like, oh, we need this church app so we can communicate with our congregation. And it has been a huge blessing for us. So we're able to push out notifications. People get them on their phone and they're able to find out where and when things are happening, and just also have a very good idea of what to expect at the church before they decide it's something that's right for their family.
That's great. I subscribed to that app because I was very curious. And, I was getting things like prayer notifications and things like that, or when the children's service would start. And I found that very cool indeed. That was great fun to have that, and wonderful that you were able to do that. I'd like to talk about a slide right now that has some information from Barna. And Barna asked this question: what are you comfortable with for VBS and summer ministry? And this is what they asked in about April of this year. And the result of that came in was that parents were saying that they were watching what schools, daycares, and local mandates were recommending for safe gathering. They were also considering the protocols their church was putting in place for safety. And I think that's probably across the board with our parents, and watching to see what is going to be best for the children. And the next slide that came up was almost 70% shared that they were ready for their kids to participate in an in-person summer VBS or ministry program. And I will say that's caused some of us to scramble. I noticed even some of the big VBS publishers were saying, you can do VBS even if you want, it's 3 weeks away or 4 weeks away. You can still do it. So I was thrilled to see that, and to see some of our churches coming on board at a late stage to have VBS programs. Because as we know, this time of year when we have VBS is the peak season for us to evangelize our children and to give them new opportunities to say yes to Jesus, which is one of the big aims that we in children's ministries have, is to have our children in a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. 80% of parents are ready to be back to full in-person children's ministries for their kids. And I love that is so. And I think that just having kids back in our churches was really exciting. I think for all of us to see kids back where we feel they just belong, right? That was great to see. So I'd like to ask you another question at home. I'd like you to put down and answer the question of what percentage of your children are back in church. And I know that's a guesstimate probably right now, but I've given you 4 options. So your answer can either be 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you can put kind of a percentage in if it's like 45 or 1/3 or 2/3, whatever your answer is. I would love to see what you put down there. So, how are you communicating with parents and volunteers? That's what I want to ask our panel next. And I'm wondering, Jennifer, could you give us some ideas of what has been working for you, how you communicate?
Yeah. So our church, like a lot of us here, we, actually, you know what, Sara, when you were saying the app, I never even thought about an app, but I think I might implement that for our church. But some of the current things that we have been doing, I usually tend to over communicate, if anything, versus under communicate with our church members. And like we had said in the beginning, our church is not the same. It might not work exactly for everyone, but for our church and for our size, I do a lot of communication through threads. There's an app that we use where a lot of our church members are part of it. If there's a new member that might have just joined us, I highly encourage them to join us in that thread so that they can get the app. So all the information that I usually communicate that is really pertinent to our children's ministry department goes on there. Like everything goes on there. And so there's that. On top of that, we have our own church announcements that goes out on a weekly basis. So I piggyback on that too, even if it's not exactly, it doesn't pertain specifically to children's ministry, I still re-communicate that as well, because not everybody checks the same. Not everyone checks the like emails and stuff. And I don't know how many people checks like text a lot of people checks their text messaging and things like that, but then some people don't check their emails and other messages. So I always just kind of overlap in many ways as much as possible. And I also try to, knowing our members, there are some people who I can guesstimate who's not checking the messages. So I personally text them and just kind of communicate with them by calling, and it takes a lot of time as leaders. I do know that, but I think it's really important because it keeps that one-on-one communication with them, and it builds that relationship with those families as well, that we're not forgetting you, that you are there and we recognize that and you are not forgotten. So I try to, for our church, we over communicate, if anything.
Well, I don't know if there's such a thing as over communication because so many people miss the cues in each of those pieces, as you pointed out. And I think, Pastor Sara, how do you communicate?
Yeah, so early on in COVID times, we had started our app, but people were used to emailing and texting, and so at first we did a lot of everything, texting and emailing and push notifications and messaging through our Subsplash app that we have. We've actually found that some of our church members don't appreciate getting notified on so many of the, because you have like some that are very involved, they're always aware of the messages, and then they get like 5 of them. So we have had to read our congregation, and it's different for each one, different sizes, different personalities, different, areas. And ours were gradually and finally like saying goodbye to email, as we've used email to say, get the app, get the app, get the app. I still used text messaging with my core volunteers. So I have a children's ministry director and some just very instrumental volunteers that I use text messages with. But with anything beyond like 3 or 4 of my inner circle of volunteers, I use our church app messaging thread. And this is something that you could look into Subsplash or various other kind of app platforms to look at what's best for your church. But in terms of the church as a whole, not specifically volunteers, it's push notifications. And this has been made possible because our church as a whole has decided to go with this app vision. And so our bulletin has been replaced by this church app. We don't hand out papers anymore, right? So now we have, everybody can find it on their phone or their tablet, and it's also on the website too. So it's mirrored. You can, if you're not a smartphone savvy, you can always use the internet to find the same information that we put in our apps.
So talking about, just moving on a little bit and talking about volunteers, and having volunteers coming back again. How do we make volunteers feel safe coming back to church again? Because I think for a lot of us, we have lost volunteers over this last 18 months or so. Pastor Jana.
Well, as Pastor Ryan talked about before, and I don't mean to steal your talking points, but I just might. I think a lot of ways, first of all, I can't tell somebody what is safe for them. They know their health. They know their needs. They know what is being advised with masking and vaccinations. And they know you can even look and see the percentages of vaccinations in our area. So the likelihood of unvaccinated people coming to church, they have to know that. So first is, I encourage them to follow what they feel to be best for them. I don't want to assure them that they'll be safe. I am not capable of doing that. But I can tell them what we are doing. And that is what that communication. I think safety goes a deeper level to people want to feel safe internally, not just physically safe, but judgment free. And so when I talk to potential volunteers, I assure them, if you are not ready to come back yet, I respect that. And that is okay. Just know that the invitation is there, that you are wanted, that you continue to be wanted, and I will continue to reach out to you and your kids and your family regardless of your choice. And letting them know that from where I sit, their choice is up to them. And I think that judgment-free safety matters as much because I can't guarantee physical safety in this world. I'm doing everything I can, same as we do with any insurance for a trip and making sure that we have fire safety in our church and all of that. But can I guarantee somebody there's not going to be a fire and somebody's not going to, panic and it's not going to go badly? I can't, but I can tell you what we're doing to help that.
Yeah, can I talk as well? Yeah. Just got to get permission, Before I say some things on the volunteer piece, I'm going to definitely go back to this recording and write down kind of the over-communication piece because I probably could do better in that regard. So good on you, Jennifer, for that. To over-communicate and to to at least let people know where they can find the information is really important. As far as helping keep the volunteers safe and as we invite them back to be a part of ministry and helping our kids grow closer to Jesus, I think one thing that COVID forced me and those I work with to do is we actually had to call people up individually or as a family and call up and say, hey, how's it going? Whereas in church, I just say, hey, good to see you. And then that's about all we get. But COVID paused things a little bit and that's something that I want to keep going, where as I invite them to engage in the conversation of being involved in the ministry of children's ministry at our church, to not lose that personal touch of reaching out in a personal way. I'm really good at sending out an email, and we have email systems that will replace the first name, so it makes it look personal. But if they're smart enough and they've seen enough emails, they know that it's just a push email to everyone, and their name just happened to slip in there. So right now, we're going to talk about getting back and what we're doing getting back. But I've seen, as we're a little bit behind some of my colleagues here in getting back, I've seen that the way I want to do it is in a personal way, where we can talk about those, am I okay with where COVID is right now, or am I not? And then me just listening, talking to them, and interacting with them in a personal way, showing that I care, goes a long way. So slowing down and connecting in a personal way is really important.
So several months ago, I actually saw a video that one church made, not in the Oregon conference, but in another one of our conferences, where they actually did a walkthrough of the children's ministries area so that the parents would know how the whole process went down once the child came back into church again. So that's one way to help the child and the parent adjust to having the child back in church again. But is there anything else that you may have done to make your children feel comfortable?
So we've just been trying to be very understanding and consistent. Kids are coming back, and a lot of them haven't been in school, haven't been in a sit in a chair and listen setting for a very long time. And especially when you're dealing with the tiny ones, if they're 4 years old now, they don't remember a time when they were in Sabbath school sitting down and listening. So just being consistent with our program, with the structure, with our expectations, communicating those clearly, and then having a lot of grace in understanding that it's going to take some time and we're having to relearn skills that kids might have been great at, and they can get there again, but we just have to be patient and filled with grace in that process.
Thanks. Pastor Sara?
Yes, I don't know if what I'm about to say pertains specifically to safety as much as just like comfort for the kids, and going off of what Macy said, which is, I second that a lot. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old myself, who my 2-year-old was napping through church programs and Sabbath schools when there wasn't COVID. And so she's like, this is so new. And putting them in a program that was rather traditional and like it used to be, like very structured. It's the same program for like 4 weeks in a row, has been wonderful for them. They love coming into a room where they know exactly what's expected of them. The props are familiar. Like, it doesn't have to be a new thing each week, which is something that was a good reminder for myself. Whereas our older kids, I've noticed that they love a little bit of variety, but because they're not used to maybe sitting for such a long period of time in a Sabbath school and then going to church and sitting through I know if they were anything like my kids at home during COVID, they were hardly sitting and watching the program as it was. They're running around while the TV's on and they're watching church virtually. So we've had to implement into our program a lot more get up and move activities to help them feel like this is where they want to be at. And then, of course, you have the difficulty of spacing them out appropriately, not letting them get too handsy with one another so that they're safe. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but coming up with creative ways for them to do activities in their place, and then variety for them while keeping consistency for the youngest ones. That's been what we've been working towards.
That's great. Thank you. Now we want to transition to talking more about volunteers. There are many hands and hearts that go into a children's ministries program throughout the year. When you consider the great reward of seeing children responding to God's love, it can be hard to imagine why anyone would walk away from this type of ministry. Yet, from year to year, volunteers can get burnt out. How do you get the right people into the right roles and keep them there? Today, we're going to look at some different ways that have worked for us of how we have recruited and kept volunteers. So I'm going to start off now with Pastor Jana and ask her this. How do you target the right people?
I think that you have already said it. I think it's a switch of how we've ever done ministry, and it's something that I've wanted to see implemented for a long time, and I think we're at a place to do it. And that's that we have a structure that we've done Sabbath school and church in a way for I actually don't know how long, where you have the person, and you might have one key leader every week if you're really lucky. I have one of those Sabbath schools right now where I have a faithful person who oversees it and has for years. And the rest right now, you think up one parent 1 week, one parent the next week. You're on the first Sabbath, you're on the second Sabbath. Fill those slots, have somebody oversee the room, check, done. And it was getting harder and harder to find somebody who was willing to commit to once a month. And then COVID hit. And so now it's kind of coming back. And I had this idea that that certain ministries had to be done a certain way, and there were certain ones that were too big to fail. So in some ideas, I don't think it is healthy, and at our church, we really strongly believe we don't keep a ministry going just because we did it before. If we have a great leader in a great ministry, like backpacks for school children in need, wonderful ministry, great thing. But when that person stepped down and they didn't have somebody, we didn't go around twisting arms to make somebody else do it. Instead, we would go to people and say, "What's your passion?" And I'm realizing I think we can also do this with children's ministries. That instead of saying to parents, "We need you to teach on the first Sabbath of every month," we go to them and say, "What's your passion? And how can the church support that?" Does that sometimes mean that big ministries don't have leadership until somebody finds it as their passion? Well, currently we don't have a Pathfinder director. So, and we have a rather large club, and I'm standing by this, that rather than twisting arms to make people serve in places that don't fit them, I'm standing by them. Maybe seeing the need will make people go, "I do love this ministry." And instead of it being somebody else asking me to do it, I'm finding a desire within myself to make this ministry happen. It's going to be uncomfortable. I may be going about it the wrong way, but I think it's important that we try, that we flip it on its head and ask people to find what God is calling them to do rather than fit them into the ministries that we already have in place.
Yeah, I read a youth ministry book, and going back a long time now, by a guy by the name of De Vries. And he did that with his youth ministry long enough for the parents of those kids to realize the importance of it, and then to start from scratch all over again.
And it's a risk, and it's one that I think will be a learning process, because it also hurts my heart to know that there are kids who want to be in this. And maybe if I pushed a little or had the right conversation, if I was really more focused, we could have, am I putting kids at risk? And I have to believe that our systems are strong enough to hold each other up. So where I'm at, we have a school, we have Sabbath schools, we have the main church service, we have, in normal times, children's church. We haven't really established what we're doing for this year yet. Physical distancing in children's church, I'm not quite sure we can pull that off. We're still discussing the ideas there. These different things, and to say, hopefully, any one ministry, that's okay. But it does mean sometimes we don't have a Sabbath school leader because I haven't found one, and a new family is there, and somebody brought their friend from home, and you have to make that call, and a lot of times somebody will step up, and I'm always a little torn when the children's ministries director goes, "Okay, fine, I'll just teach," and I'm like, "No, wait, the whole was important for people to feel it," but then you go, but who's feeling the whole? So it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's a magic bullet, but I think it's an important mindset to be moving towards.
Shirley, can I share something on those on that line of thought? We have struggled right now finding enough leaders and volunteers to teach so that all our Sabbath school classes can be fully active. So we've combined our primary and kindergarten, and we have the amount of like a one Sabbath school class for that. And I am operating similar to Jana in that I'm going to continue with work within my means, not pretend we were what we were before COVID, which was a much more volunteer full active church, and do what we can with what we have and show that if there's a need that's felt, then I have faith that parents and volunteers will rise to the occasion. Additionally, I lost a little bit of my train of thought with that. Something you said triggered it, but it's gone now. Anyways.
I'm going to ask you to keep the mic, though, and let's move on to the next question. I've got a statement here. Don't be afraid to ask. So how do you do that, Pastor Sara?
That was it. Thank you. Okay, well, that actually triggered what I was going to say, and it leads us right into that perfect transition, hopefully. We may not be able to always find volunteers to fit the lead kindergarten job, but something that we've learned from COVID, that I think, Jennifer, you alluded to, was that people are a little bit more willing to take small responsibilities because it's not asking so much of them that they can't commit to it. If we just take people for what they're willing to give. Like, present to them, communicate to them, this is the palette of options that you have. How would you like to serve? And take as many, even if it's not as easy as the leader, because it means more moving parts and more scheduling. In the end, you're getting to use more people to do the ministry than just a few. And in light of what you were just asking, Shirley, I am learning, and I love the philosophy of don't assume that you know the answer. Don't assume that you have people figured out, because people will surprise you. And particularly in the context of, I don't know if that person's an upfront person. I don't know. They might be a little shy. I don't know if their schedule will allow for that. They're a very busy person. Don't make those assumptions, because you might and most likely are wrong about some of them, if not possibly all of them. I have made a couple assumptions in my head about some of my volunteers, thinking, they're maybe too shy for this, but I'm going to ask them anyways. And I ask them, and they end up being like a totally different person up front of the kids. And it's constantly a reminder that give people the respect of being able to say yes or no and decide for themselves what their limitations are, because God can bless through things that you may not know, you're not aware of, and bring people to the forefront that will surprise you.
Jennifer, is there anything that you can add to that about how you go about asking people that you can think of?
So very similar, I would say. Actually, just the last maybe year and a half, there were definitely surprises, because like Sara was saying, I was surprised myself, and I pre-assumed certain people would be helping, certain people not. And honestly, I don't know what everybody's gifts are. I don't know if they're not ready, they might not, even if they have the gift, if they're not ready to step up. But then there might be those who you might, as a leader, might not see either. So we had, I think, remembering that and just asking the ask. You never know. I think that's a good step, because you just don't know what God is putting on people's hearts. And kind of in line with what our churches actually we planned on doing. We were starting to do something right before COVID, and it just kind of everything had to stop. But the thing with communication too, I think it's very important to communicate openly, like we are here, with the families. So the members, if there's like some kind of like a family meeting that you can hold for all the children's ministry families that can join, and we can openly talk about things like this, I really think that could open up maybe just new ideas, or maybe like, hey, maybe this is not the direction that we could be going into. And then being honest with them, telling them this is where we are at. We don't have enough volunteers, or we have these programs we would like to continue on, but if we don't have any volunteers, we can't continue on with it. So, I think the honesty is really great, and it can open up communication. It might enlighten the leaders, the things that we might not know of, how some of the other families are feeling, as well as vice versa. So
when I was pastoring, one of the things that I would willingly take on was visiting with new families. And one of the things that I always asked was what that family thought their spiritual gifts were, because that gives you a total insight into maybe an area where they can be of service and use their gifts for the benefit of the church. And you can find out some surprising things just chatting with families and getting to know them a little bit more. Pastor Ryan, how about you? Anything on your side? And then we'll ask Pastor Jana after you.
I like to go after Jana, because she always has good things to say.
It's a cop-out right there. I've heard so much wisdom already. Yeah. So it's jumping off of a little of what Sara said, is to not assume. I often go to the moms, and I think that's a mistake. I think dads are more willing to help than we give them credit for. I don't mean more than moms in particular. I just think it's that I'm a mom. I have an easier time with other moms. I don't, my own spouse is not an upfront teacher. That's not his gift. And I'm used to that in my family. And I have been so pleasantly surprised when I just don't assume. Both gender, and age, and all of the above. I think, from one of my favorite teachers is a junior in high school. And she teaches the baby room once a month and is excellent at it. And the baby room is an excellent place for new teachers because it gives you a card and you flip a thing, right? Like that's a great learning spot. And then I have some wonderful older ladies who are great assistants in the rooms, who are just a calming presence and love the kids. I don't have, I got to try some older men in those rooms. See, there you go. I need to remember that my own advice.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes when I go to ask somebody to help out with a position in children's ministries or anywhere else, sometimes I don't have it clearly articulated what I expect of that role. So I won't steal Macy's thunder here, but I also, when I go to ask somebody, kind of what we talked about before, having that personal listening, asking, like Miss Shirley Allen said, just saying, hey, where are you passionate? Where is your heart? And then, saying, hey, that's great. We have these opportunities, and this is what those look like. And some of the best volunteers that I've had, I've just said, hey, can you do this? And they're like, and the next text they reply with, if I'm texting or emailing, is, what does that look like? And that's often what I forget about when I'm asking individuals to help out. But having that clear in my mind so that when they do ask, I'm like, oh, yeah, that, or preempting that with that. But then respecting them as they, need some time to process that. So as I ask, giving people time and not expecting them to be on my timeline, which is often, tomorrow's Sabbath. So if there's anyone free for the junior department, anyway. So yeah, respecting people's time, respecting that their life is in flux, and maybe they did this in the past and it worked for them and it might have changed, but they still, like Sara said, they still might surprise you on what they are capable and have the opportunity of doing.
Yeah, and giving them the honest truth, not saying, oh, it won't take long. What is the preparation time? Actually calculating what that would be and what it looks like for the family. Pastor Macy, what kind of expectations, I've just maybe trod into your area here, but how do you give that from the start?
I try to think about what would I want to know if someone was asking me to do something. I have a life, I have a family, I have a lot going on. And so I want to know, if you ask me, hey, will you help with crafts for VBS? Well, that could mean a lot of different things. Does that mean you're going to hand me a box with all the things, all the craft supplies already in it, with a script that's highlighted, and all I have to do is spend 10 minutes reading through it the day of, and then be ready to explain it to the kids? Or does that mean that the week before VBS, you're going to hand me the guide, and I'm going to have to go through, decide which crafts we're doing on which days, find all the supplies, pull it all together, and then come and do it? Those are two vastly different commitments. Either one of them are something acceptable to ask of someone, but they need to know which of those two things you are asking. And so I try to think through, like, what support am I going to have? How long are you asking me to do this? Is this for the next 2 years? Is this for this week? What are we talking about? And I like to give people an out of, like, I'm not asking you to do this forever and ever, amen. You are not committing for your lifetime. Would you like to do a trial period? Would you like my help? How can I support you? If you just had to show up to VBS and put on the crafts, would you say yes then? So trying to feel out, are you willing if I help support you more too? So what do you want? How can I help you? And how can I give you an out?
Sure.
And one of the things that we're saying, but I want to say a little more, I'll never forget when I was first in ministry, and I hadn't really been placed at a church yet, so they had me helping at a particular church, and that children's ministries director was like, actually, we're doing a youth trip. Do you want to come along on the youth trip and maybe do a few worships? So I come along on the youth trip, and then as the weekend unfolded, it became clear that my responsibilities were going to be much greater, to the point of I was cleaning up and closing up because, well, I have to take the kids back. And they looked at me like, how you can't have a problem with the fact that I have to take the van with all the kids back and somebody has to stay here and do this. And I felt very bitter and used. And I never want anybody else to feel that way. And I don't think manipulation is the way to get involvement. So I think that's kind of what we're saying, but I want to say it more clearly. Laying out expectations and then supporting people in their boundaries with those expectations builds healthy relationships with our volunteers.
Well, I wanted to say keep the mic because I have another question for you. Do you use past volunteers much?
I use everybody I possibly can. I'm not sure what you mean by past volunteers. I love to go to somebody who's been at the job before and said, you were wonderful at this. We would love to have you back if you still feel a passion. And sometimes they will, and sometimes they say, that time of my life has passed. So we have the gamut in our ministry. We have people, like I said, we have a junior in high school. We have my own 13-year-old's doing music for a Sabbath school just last minute. We have lots of people. And then we have teachers that have been teaching in the same room for 20 years. And please, I hope I have them for another 20 years. So I just think, again, and it's not just about a warm body. It's about people who care about kids and are passionate about kids. And it doesn't matter if we don't actually do as much of a timeline, as much as I go to people and say, we love having you. When you're done, I'm going to honor that. So I'm going to have you on there. I'm going to have you on the schedule. But please know, you can come to me whenever I never want our ministry to be a drain on your life. Sometimes it will be. But when that balance should be, you find more joy than the frustrating and draining times. Lots more joy. And when that balance starts to shift, I want to know and support you. So please come to me and say that.
And I also think that with past volunteers, they know what it takes if you're doing the same program. But they know what it takes. So even if they aren't the ones that step up to the plate to take that responsibility, they know what it takes. And so they might say, well, I think that so-and-so might fit this role well. And then as a leader, it might be a good segue to say, hey, would you mind asking them, since you have done this before, even if it was a year and a half ago, they understand what it takes. And then maybe asking them whether they are or are not going to take that role. Past volunteers have a wealth of wisdom. I mean, just listening today, I'm glad this is recorded so I can, go back and take notes. But they have a wealth of wisdom that they have gotten firsthand that maybe you can add to your repertoire as you go to new volunteers, and you can add to that and make your ask or the person that will say yes more effective in the ministry that you're asking them to do.
If I can interject, I would add that ownership is a very important part of ministry and life. And that we want volunteers to not just feel like they have to keep doing what the last person was doing, but that they can take that and own that and make it their own, and that's okay. And so we want to enable people to do something different too, but to be clear with our expectations and say, hey, this is what has been being done. Here's how much time it was taking. Here's what was happening. But you don't have to do it that same way. If you have a passion for this and want to change something, how can I help you?
So while you have the mic in hand there, can you tell us a little bit more about how you organize this?
I love organization, and it drives some people nuts. I always have a list and 5 colors of highlighters on me at any given time. And I just think that organization is so important because we need a game plan. My least favorite thing is when I show up to something and we have a group of volunteers who would like to be put to work, standing around, waiting for instructions, and half of the time that they're there to help, they were waiting. So I like to have an example or written instructions because if I'm the leader, I can't be everywhere at once. I don't want people to be waiting on me because an emergency came up over here and they're waiting over here. So I try to have duplication over communication, like Jennifer said, of like, here's written instructions. I've tried to put it in bullet points. Here's the most important stuff that's highlighted. Your group is group blue, over organization, over planning. And that goes to events with volunteers, but it also goes to how do we store stuff? Because I don't want a ministry spending a bunch of money on crayons or stickers or whatever when we have a whole bin of those over on that shelf. So knowing what we have and having it organized in such a way that it can be found so that we are not tossing money on duplicating supplies. So I try to kind of know what people do and encourage them to organize things in a way that makes sense in their spaces. And then before we go out and spend money on something, I try to say, can we borrow that? And just asking and having lots of lists so that that's my way of organizing for myself so that I know where to go, who to ask before we spend a lot of time or money.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to pass that mic on to Jennifer and then Sara. And we're going to have to skip along a little faster. Our time is running out. And, you can tell we're just a little bit passionate about what we're talking about. But as far as curriculum is concerned, how do you help new people coming into volunteering understand the curriculum?
So, like new families or new teachers,
New
volunteers.
families would be as well,
Yes.
but I'm thinking more about the volunteers.
So if there's new volunteers, it's a lot of, we make a lot of mistakes. It's almost like if they're taking on a role like as a Sabbath school teacher, it's really, here's the program. We will, you have to look over it, read through it, and see if you can commit to it, laying out all the foundations, like this is the commitment that you will have to put in. Like if you're our church goes by a month at a time. So the teachers will teach like usually 4 or 5 weeks and then takes a few months break and then come back. So if they're not able to do something like that, I try to find, talking to them to see what are you comfortable doing? I know it seems like if you are interested in joining the team or helping out in church, what is it that you would like to do? If there's any specific areas, or even if it's just like a small little area that they would like to participate in, whatever it may be, just trying to use them as wherever they can be. I don't always have a plan. As much as I think our churches, like our children's ministry, is pretty organized, but knowing, like planning out like what is going to be 6 months out, 1 year out, I don't always know. And I think that for us and for myself, I try to be as flexible. If there's changes that occur with volunteers, sometimes they might commit and they say yes, but then they're like some circumstance has come up and they're like, I can't do it for the next half a year, even though I committed to 1 year. You're in that situation. What are you going to do? You just make adjustments, and it's okay. I think during COVID, what I realized, and some of our main leaders in children's ministry realize, is that we don't always have to do everything to the scale that we expected and what we thought should have been done. But it's okay to make it simple. It's okay to cut things out if it means that even if certain programs you might have to eliminate, it's okay. I think the important thing to remember is that more importantly, with what happened after COVID, seeing what the realization was for our team was that it's really important to just connect with someone, connect with a church, have something, for them. Just so it doesn't have to be like those major scales of we had Sabbath school. We used to have Sabbath school. We used to have children's church. We used to have all these programs throughout the year. If it means that you have to cut out to just having Sabbath school, I think it's okay. That simplifying, I think it's really important too. And just remembering that what the purpose of why we're here, what the main purpose is. And as a church, having that support with not just children's ministry, but the whole church is super important, I think, with the board, with all the elders. And, I think that's really important.
Sara.
Well, before COVID, it was like Grace Link. You didn't even really have a written schedule too much. Everybody just knew what week they were on for Sabbath school, and they already had it on the web what the lesson was going to be, and they just carried it out. Since then, we have tried so many different things, and what something looks like for us now is we have primary and kindergarten as one Sabbath school, and we've created new curriculum to fit the needs of social distancing and just sanitization. We can't pass out the same kind of things we used to or do the same kind of crafts or physical activities. And so what it looks like for us at the moment, and I fully expect it to change again, is that I create a Google spreadsheet of a schedule. I have my volunteers on a mass emailing list or in our messaging thread on our app, and I say, here's the schedule, and I've outlined, a month or maybe up to 3, depending on the curriculum and my abilities. And in there, I create links of, depending on the curriculum, a PDF of exactly the lesson that they can carry out, or videos for them to look at and show or get ideas from. And to be honest, I really just take each volunteer on an individual basis based on their interest level and their comfort zone. Some of them are like, oh, man, you don't need to give me a PDF. I'll come up with something to teach. Others, I want every word written out so that I just memorize my notes and follow it. And I want as many of them to participate as possible. So I endeavor to go above and beyond to meet their needs and communicate with them on an individual basis. My goal is often wanting to get everybody in the same place so I can just spend one message and everybody has it figured out. But for the most part, what I care about even more is just getting as many volunteers participating as possible and them enjoying it. The thing that I just would be so sad about is if I'm like giving people tools that they don't feel like they know how to use, or not giving them enough tools, or forcing them into a box when they'd rather be a little bit more creative. So try to meet everybody where they're at.
I'm going to skip through a couple of questions now, and I'm going to ask Pastor Jana, how do you uplift your group of volunteers?
I'm really glad you didn't skip this one, because I've actually been thinking about this as we've been sitting here and before. And of course, prayer. And during COVID, this has actually been a beautiful thing where my leaders, we actually went through and made a list, and we're praying and sending out texts and just to families in general. And that was wonderful. And I want to go beyond that and say something that this is more preaching to myself than anybody else, is when it comes to Sabbath in particular, but other times too, I really want to be somebody who does most of the work outside of church, so that when I see people at church, I'm not thinking, what role can they fill in my life? And then I forget that they are a human and a family, and they came and they had a week of their own, and they have a life of their own outside of church. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I believe that people have it. And to be able to to see people as people and children as children, not how many kids do we have in this room, but they came, and are they being, is the child happy? Have I shown them that they are special to me? And then have I taken a minute to have that moment of conversation that isn't you're not one of the teachers today, I don't need to check in with you, so I smile and nod and keep on going because I'm on a track. But to be actually present and to care about the people regardless of their volunteer status. I think that's something that is uplifting, even and of course praying for them. And I pray and pray and pray. And I think a lot of times God is saying, you are there, be there for the people when you're there. Don't just be thinking about the work and the tasks.
One last question, Pastor Macy. How do you show volunteers that they make a difference?
So I worked at one of our wonderful summer camps, and every night after campfire, the staff who weren't with the kids would circle up and we would have an affirmation circle. And you would say something like, today Ryan was with his kids at the craft department and he did this really cool thing. And that created a wonderful culture in that camp, that place and time, of recognizing and sharing small, specific moments. Now, we can't always get all of our volunteers together in a circle after Sabbath school. We have lives, there's potluck, you're going home, kids are crabby, whatever. But finding a way to do it, noticing those moments, that was something that culture at camp taught me, was to not just be like, oh, that was cool, and forget about it, but to remember those specific little moments and then to mention it, to praise Ryan later, to remember that Sara did this little thing that was helpful to your day that she probably didn't even notice she was doing. And to be very specific about the things that are helpful. Instead of just a blanket email, hey, thanks, guys, but being specific in that and telling people how you are seeing them make a difference. Not just in a large way, those emails are helpful too, but in specific ways. And I love the handwritten note. So a handwritten note, it doesn't need to be long, 2-3 sentences. Leave it in their Sabbath school room for them to find the next week. Throw in a piece of chocolate. I have a stash of that. And making sure that especially our Sabbath school teachers and others who are in the trenches every single week feel affirmed and uplifted and know that we are thankful for them.
That's a really good note to end on today, and I just want to say to the panel how much I appreciate your input, your expertise, your honesty, and everything that you have shared today. I have one more slide that I would like to share with everybody before we close off today. And this slide says, Children's Ministries is the most strategic and futuristic ministry of the church. I'm going to read that again. Children's Ministries is the most strategic and futuristic ministry of the church. Write that down, share that, and put it up somewhere in your children's ministries department so that people can grasp how important children's ministries is for now and for the future and for our children and families in our church. Thank you so much for joining us today, and it's been a treat to be here with each of you. God bless and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.